Like the TBC systems are perfect. I think they're pretty close. I think a lot of the systems in TBC are pretty close. And I think by the time you get the Wrath, I think it starts snowballing out of control and causing real problems. One of the biggest problems that is amongst these systems is also itemization. Itemization is a disaster. I think Gorthax posted my last YouTube video before I left, right? Where I was talking about how bad Naxx is. Like the Naxx patch is so bad for the game. The Naxx patch, like everybody, like Naxx, in current year, at this point in time in history, people know the problems with Naxxramas. And it has very little to do with the raid. The problems with Naxx come from the itemization. There's this breakpoint. But what the Naxx patch did was it destroyed itemization. The trajectory of itemization for the entire history of the rest of World of Warcraft was ruined. Everything got so optimized that I'm wondering if there's a story I can share. I know a very interesting story that made a big impact on the history of like WoW, but I don't know if I can share it or not. But it has to do with like somebody emailing Jeff Kaplan at the beginning of Burning Crusade. And basically like the Naxx gear was so good that they ended up having to re-itemize the stuff at the beginning of Burning Crusade and Karazhan and the raids because the Naxx gear was so efficient that it didn't replace it. It was so good. This is back in 2007. In the Naxx patch, in AQ40, you kind of have this like itemization power curve, okay? Here we go, I'm gonna pull out the paint. So I'm gonna load up some vanilla itemization stuff. I did a video about this years ago, and I mean years, like maybe 8 years ago. Okay, so I wanna show you some things. Here, if we look at the design of Classic WoW, isn't it crazy how many years it's been and now we're looping back around? What do you do with iconic gear when you mess with itemization? Okay, I have a hot take. No, actually I'm gonna save my hot take for the end of my explanation. So I wanna show you guys some of this gear. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about itemization in vanilla WoW. So when you talk about itemization in vanilla WoW and how this stuff works, epic gear might, okay? We're looking at the battle gear of might, all right? This is the warrior tier 1 set that drops in Molten Core. In original vanilla WoW, like OG vanilla, Molten Core actually dropped tier 2 and tier 1. And then they changed it like a patch, maybe one or two patches before Blackwing Lair came out, and they took the tier 2 out. And then they put it in Blackwing Lair and they re-itemized it and stuff. But in vanilla now, tier 1 is Molten Core, and the tier sets that we get all have like a certain item level, okay? Now, I've talked about how gear score is basically like a worthless metric in Classic. At least in vanilla, it's completely worthless. In Burning Crusade, it's mostly worthless. In Wrath, the gear starts to get so optimized from the end of vanilla through Burning Crusade and into Wrath that it becomes a thing in Wrath, which sucks. It's very stupid. Terrible design for itemization, all that stuff. Actually so bad. Now look at all these tier 1 pieces of gear. You see how it's like item level 66? What is item level? Item level isn't gear score necessarily, but item level is a variable that is put into a formula that like coincides with the quality of an item. So if an item is an epic piece of gear that's level 66, and I think it also depends on like what slot it goes into, I think is part of the formula, you have a certain amount of itemization points. So whenever you look at itemization points, like your main stats, like strength, stamina, these are all equal. In vanilla, they're all equal. And you'll have a certain amount of points, but then you also have like chance to dodge an attack, plus defense, fire resistance. You have all these other stats. This item level 66 item, and I think it's everything, but maybe for tier 1, it's all 66. So you guys can see at the top of those tooltips right there, it's item level 66, item level 66. So the variable for every single one of these is 66 for tier 1, okay? So for tier 1, the first raid tier, you're looking at like this kind of item level roughly. It like goes up into the 70s, and that's kind of what we're seeing. Okay, that's cool, Esfand. What does this mean? Where are you going with this? So it's not really just about the item level, but it's also about how the stat allocation works. I can do this better with a class that's like a hybrid, actually, so you can see the example a little bit better. But let's look at the Lawbringer set for a Paladin. If we look at the Lawbringer set for a Paladin, again, item level 66. You have on this one piece of gear, 13 strength, 15 stamina, 20 intellect, 8 spirit, 7 fire resistance, and 18 plus healing. What? Who is this for? 7 strength, 20 stamina, 13 intellect, 10 spirit, 7 shadow resistance, 2 mana per 5, 18 healing. Now, in our stupid min-max zug brain as an MMO player that we have developed over the years, when you look at these pieces of gear, this isn't really like an optimal suit of gear for anybody. This isn't the best for a rep paladin. It's not the best for a holy paladin. However, there's certain things that this set is really, really good for, like certain builds. If you're in vanilla and you're like a holy reckoning paladin in PvP, like you have a little bit of strength, you have a decent amount of stamina, intellect, you have some plus healing. This is actually like a pretty good suit, but if you want to have the highest throughput for healing as a paladin, you really wouldn't use this. At best, you might use the 3-piece set bonus to put Judgment of Light and have a higher chance that it procs. You could also look at the other things, it's like the 5 set gives you 1 spell crit and 1 melee crit. The 8 set gives you a chance to proc a 200 heal for your whole party, which is kind of cool. So like this whole suit, it might be useful for, you know, certain like kind of off builds or whatever. And that's really what the core of the paladin class in vanilla is that. I look at all of WoW like this big cone. In vanilla, it's really wide and open at the top. And then in Burning Crusade, it gets more tight. In Wrath, it gets tighter and it goes all the way down to where it gets really, really streamlined in retail WoW. And eventually you kind of like play the spec and not the class. I'm talking about class design, right? Where you have a lot of different opportunity. With this gear, it's item level 66, but you have stats everywhere. You have some points in spirit, you have some points in mana per 5. You have some points in strength, you have some points in the resistances. You have some plus healing, you don't have any plus damage. It's like a shotgun of stats and it's all over the place. But to continue the scaling, right? Let's go ahead and do this. You're looking at tier 1, and that's like item level 66, okay? So tier 1 being item level 66, okay? And then you look at tier 2. If you look at tier 2, Judgment. It might be 76 actually, okay? So you're looking at 76. So the entire suit, same thing, 76 item level. But now look at the stats that you're seeing on the Judgment suit. 8 strength, 14 stamina, 20 intellect, 6 spirit, 10 shadow resist, and then damage and healing instead of just healing. It gives you plus damage and healing. This is, by the way, this is the late patch version of Judgment. Judgment gear changed, I think, to 3 different versions. This is the late patch version. Lawbringer also changed. But you can see how this like is a scaling up of the Lawbringer gear, right? Some of the same stats expanded. Okay, all the same stats actually, but just expanded, you know? You're looking at the Blackwing Lair patch and you're looking at the Molten Core patch. You kind of have this like, this is your item level. And then you kind of have this like, you have like a degree of like efficacy, how good an item is, how effective that item is. You kind of go, it's almost linear from the BWL patch. This is MC, this is BWL. It's pretty good, right? It's pretty linear. But here's when things start to change. When you go and look at the Avengers set, this is tier 2.5, the scaling goes up a little bit. So look, 78. It's not that much higher item level, 78, 78. And then I think 2 pieces are 78, 2 pieces are 81, but then the chest is 88, okay? So now you're looking at that's what they call it, tier 2.5. So you have tier 2.5. And then what this is between 78 and 88. So it only has a little bit more itemization points on some pieces like the boots. That's why tier 2.5 boots and tier 2.5 shoulders aren't like that many more stats than the tier 2 gear. But look at the stat allocation. Heavy on strength, agility is added in, damage and healing, strength, agility. This turns into a rep paladin set. Improves your chance to get a critical strike by 1%. So now, and then finally look at the chest, 23 strength, 12 agility, 24 stamina, 24 intellect, 11 spirit, 18 plus damage, and then 1% spell crit, 1% melee crit. So now Blizzard is starting to realize come AQ patch, wait, we need to kind of focus down the tier gear a little bit more. So even though itemization points only go up a little bit, they don't go up that much. The chest goes up a lot. The itemization points only go up a little bit. What actually ends up happening is instead of having this like linear sort of progression from MC to BWL, you look at AQ and then all of a sudden, instead of being boom, 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 it's kind of like up here. So now you're looking at that. And there's a distinct difference. Now, finally, by the time you get into the Nax patch, yeah, you get a little curve. Now, gentlemen, listen, let's be honest. Everybody knows a little curve is okay, okay? A little curve is okay. So it's not too bad in AQ 40, okay? But the curve becomes too much at a certain point. And that's tier 3. And tier 3, you got like item level 86, item level 88. So it kind of starts at that point and it goes all the way up to 92, okay? So if you're looking at like this gear, yeah, it's not that many more itemization points than like the chest piece is an 88 here and the head piece is an 88 here. But look at how those stat points in that formula for how many itemization points you have is allocated. 28 stamina, 26 intellect, no other main stat. Plus healing, spell crit, mana per 5. This is the ultimate, like as almost as insanely efficient as you possibly could be set of gear for a Holy Paladin in vanilla. Like that is insane. What ends up happening is by the time you get to the Nax patch, by the time you get to tier 3, where you go up to like item level 92, this doesn't continue linear to here. It doesn't go linear to here. It doesn't go linear to here. You go all the way up here. Like it is so much better than any other type of gear that you end up shooting way the hell up over here. This right here, this is the danger zone of itemization in vanilla WoW. When you're talking about design, I think there's a lot of problems that you have here after Blackwing Lair and after Zul'Gurub. So you also, look, I'm gonna put this here, like ZG is here too. ZG and then AQ20, okay? Blizzard needs to look at this part of the itemization in vanilla WoW, and they need to do two things. I think they literally need to break after like the BWLZG patch. They need to take a break in how things are itemized, and they need to kind of recalculate what they want to do in the future. Recalculate the rest of the trajectory of gear in the expansion so that you don't become too powerful. Every like vanilla WoW enthusiast I know, it's been like tried and true for years. Everybody thinks Blackwing Lair and ZG from a gameplay perspective is the best patch. From building your character to the way the stuff's itemized to the different cool items, you know, even like the ZG armor and the set bonuses, it's very cool. And I think they need to draw from that and say, hey, how can we take this itemization and expand it throughout the entirety of the game, and then develop more of a horizontal progression curve as opposed to like it needs to be more logarithmic and less exponential. Like the efficacy of your character needs to not be exponential, it needs to be logarithmic. This is kind of like how power creep works in vanilla WoW, and this is what I think they need to do to address the power creep. I think they need to go and kind of find that ZG BWL patch, and I think they need to re-itemize the game from that point. Now this does two things. One, I think it's better for the long-term health of the game. But in addition to that, and this is something I think is very interesting. Do you remember in the classic WoW beta, how interesting it was for people to be level 30 and they were coming up with new things, coming up with new metas, they were learning new things because nobody had ever had a level 30 max before, right? I think if you are to do a classic plus, and this might be kind of a hot take, I feel like you should consider re-itemizing a significant portion of the game, even while you're leveling, to make the itemization not only like a little bit more interesting, but I think it should make the metas more interesting. I think it'll be really, really interesting to level up and redo, you know, pick your items and do all this, and it's something that's entirely new. I think it's kind of a hot take. I'm a classic Andy, all right? I'm not necessarily a no changes guy, but I'm very much like, I'm very classic Andy here, okay? I was the original classic Andy before the other classic Andys came and ruined our good name, all right? I think that if you're doing a classic plus, I think kind of recalibrating the game and the itemization of the game, if they take this kind of BWL ZG patch and all the itemization up to it, draw inspiration from it, understand what makes it work, what makes it good. Because there's a lot of weird like jank items, like, you know, Spirit is not this terrible stat. By the way, everybody in the world thought Spirit was a terrible stat. And nowadays, whenever people are leveling in vanilla, like, yeah, dude, I love having some Spirit on my gear because I freaking heal a ton in between pulls, you know? When you hyper optimize all the gear, the game becomes boring. And then you get to the point where you're in the Nax patch. Like, have you ever dueled somebody in the Nax patch? Go on Era and duel somebody. Too much damage. The same thing actually happens in Burning Crusade in the Sunwell patch, where there's like, but it's less extreme. But in the Nax patch, everybody has way too much damage, not enough health. So what is Blizzard's response to this? They reduced the amount of itemization point cost of stamina. That's why there's so much more stamina on gear in Burning Crusade, because people are just doing too much damage. I think doing too much damage is really bad for the game because it'll make things like PvP impossible to balance. And then you end up having like SOD, where SOD did have some good things about it. PvP was a nightmare. Trying to PvP in SOD was just giga blue ass. It was so bad because of the power creep, and there's no way to adjust for that in the short term accurately. That's why I think it's super important when you want to build out a new game like a reimagining of classic WoW with some horizontal progression where, like I said, that graph kind of tapers off. And then from patch to patch, like there might be little gear increases, but maybe one dungeon drops like a ret set. Maybe one dungeon drops a tanking set. Maybe one dungeon drops a healing set. Like if you play a hybrid class, right? Maybe one dungeon is good for DPS warriors. Maybe one dungeon has more gear that's good for tank warriors, or as a dungeon raid, whatever. Maybe, you know, I should have both, right? But I'm talking about like the tier set. SOD endgame DPS was absurd. It was so exponential, it topped out at like 20K. Well, so you know what's something that happened with the design of SOD? And this is whatever I talk about, where I'm like, sometimes like the vocal minority of people are so loud and clueless about the game and like its long-term effects of decision-making. SOD came out and it had like some weird random items that were maybe, some items were actually too good then, but in the first phase of SOD, like they would make like stupid items. And a lot of people, freaking retail Andes come in and they're like, why does this item have this stat on it? This sucks. And it's like, no, you don't understand. So then they complained about like trying to like recreate original vanilla itemization to the point where like they stopped doing that as much in SOD, and then they recreated this exact problem, which makes me worried if they do a Classic Plus, if they try and approach it the same way they approach SOD, history will repeat itself, and then you end up having this like way too high of numbers. It's like a huge problem. My problem with SOD, a lot of it had to do with at level 25, I was like, I have like a full level 60 kit. Now at level 25, this thing's gonna snowball out of control, and it kind of did. But like I'm talking about itemization, I don't want the itemization to get so intensely optimized to where everybody's doing too much damage and it affects like either the difficulty of the game and making, you can't really have everything be a cakewalk, right? I understand there's a lot of people that are incredibly soft and never want to have to work for anything, and they don't have like the mental fortitude to wipe on a boss and keep going. You know, I understand that some people that exists. You might say, oh, you're saying that in a way that's like a slight, a pretentious statement. And my response to that is absolutely, you freaking losers, all right? Don't lose, you learn, okay? W's are wins, L's are learns. They're not losses, all right? Grow up, don't be a freaking baby, okay? I understand there's some people, but like I think that there needs to be some content, especially if like you were to make a Classic Plus with new game, new content, some stuff like that, where there should be some things that are like, it should be cool to have to like earn it. It should be cool to have to like attain that.